open-minded person. And I took a few phone calls from people who raised some pretty good points, disagreeing with my take that both calls last night were terrible. And the best ones that I heard were these two. One, that call was made all year. The call on Dragic where Middleton jumps right into him and Dragic is standing still straight up with his hands in the air and never moves. That they've been giving shooters that call all year long. I understand that, and it's a good point. I still believe you have to take into account the situation. Dragic is basically, his job in that situation has got to be to turn and run the other way if they're going to call that foul on him. And then, again, by the letter of the law, you're Giannis, you put your hand on Butler as you go by. I understand the rule says that's a foul. But with 0 seconds left in a playoff game, I think an exception can be made. That's me. I know some people disagree. Let's find out what Windy thinks. He's one of my favorites. Again, Brian Windhorst is with me on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Windy, your thoughts on the two big calls at the end of the game last night, Milwaukee and Miami?
I feel like I'm one of the few people in the media that is a standard defender of officiating. I think that comes from the fact that my father was a longtime umpire and basketball referee. I do stories on them. I know many of the officials. I communicate with them. So it is with that background I can say that I agree with you. I don't believe either one of those calls should be made. And the only reason I was able to sort of walk away from that situation feeling like it's okay is because I think the correct team won. Miami should have won that game, and they did win the game. And I hated both calls, and I heard what Steve Javie said, and I'm not going to argue with him on that. It's just like 2 nights ago, Jason Tatum, in a 4-point game with less than a minute, did an air punch, and the referee called a technical. It is true that an air punch is an automatic technical. Spirit of the law in a 4-point playoff game with less than a minute to play. And I think that any official would tell you that the spirit of the law is often vitally important. And that's why they have the most veteran officials out there for these games, because it's that line of nuance in those gray areas that you have to deal with.
Yes, I'm so glad you said every word of that, because the letter of the law every now and again, I think officiating, and we try and make it into a science. That's a distinction I point out a lot. The difference between something's science and some things are an art. And I think officiating these games, there is an art to it. And the great officials know how to do that. And they know that they understand the magnitude of the moment. To me, and I think Miami was going to win the series anyway, but to me, that's over. If that Butler free throw sort of rattles around and goes in, I feel like the MVP and the Bucks are done. Windy, do you give them, what chance do you give coming all the way back and winning 4 out of 5?
Well, Miami is the better team, and they're the better playoff team, I think is the better way to say it. I've been around covering the NBA now for 17 years, and so my tug of experience says, sir, do not declare a series over after 2 games. So I will refrain from doing that. Having said that, this reminds me so much, Greeny, of the 2009 conference finals. LeBron James on a 66-win Cavs team. He had claimed his first MVP. There was no question about his status as MVP, but that was a flawed Cavs team. And they had struggled against the Orlando Magic all year long. And despite those 66 wins, the Magic walked into that series very confident. And they won that series in 6 games. And would have won it in 5 games had LeBron not made one of the greatest shots of his career, hitting a buzzer beater. And this reminds me so much of that situation, right down to the fact that that was a great regular season team with a world-class regular season player in LeBron James who had not yet learned how to lead a team. He was great in that series, by the way. They didn't lose that series because of him. But he had not yet learned how to lead a team to a championship level. And that just reminds me of this so much. And it's depressing because I know, living in Cleveland at that time, that every day on the calendar that passed, the pressure of the LeBron free agency grew. And that is what I am starting to, you can feel it in the force. And so I opened the door for the Bucks to do it, but I'm looking at them, and just like in 2009, when I knew the Magic were the better team, I see the Heat as the better team.
That's a really good analogy. We'll see. We could be looking at Boston and Miami on one side of the draw, and the two LA teams now will get started on the other side. Windy is with me. And then there was the news right as we were wrapping up Get Up today that came across that the Brooklyn Nets made what I think can only be described as a very surprising outside-the-box hire. They hire Steve Nash, two-time MVP, Hall of Famer with no coaching experience, as their new head coach. I want you to hear what Jay Will said about it. Jay Will is very close to the Nets. You know he's very close to Durant. He had this to say on our morning show, KJZ. Here was Jay Will.
Look, the reality comes down to who ultimately will Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving trust. They had to put their stamp on this relationship in order for it to come to fruition. I originally thought this was going to be Ty Lue's job to lose, but ultimately, I like this Steve Nash hire. And you have Steve Nash, who has a great affiliation with Kevin, worked out with Kevin, doing a lot of player developmental stuff with the Golden State Warriors when Kev was out there in the Bay. And that relationship ultimately, as a point guard respect level with Kyrie, I'm shocked, but I love the move.
All right, so Jay Will loves the moves. Wendy, what do you think of it?
I think Sean Marks, the general manager, had to thread a needle through a narrow eye because he had to hire somebody, as Jay Will said, that would. I'm not saying that Durant and Kyrie had to put a stamp of approval on it, but if they didn't have respect for that person from day one, it was not going to have a chance. And by the way, in my view, this is one of the hardest coaching jobs in the league because there's enormous expectation and you have two players that are going to be hard to coach, not because they're petulant or they're subversive, but because the nature of who they are, the nature of their personalities, they're going to be a challenge to coach together. So Sean Marks had to get somebody that they would trust, and B, get somebody who he had a positive relationship with. He couldn't just hire who they wanted. And I'm sure, and look, he made the coaching change back in February. So he's had, my gosh, 6 months to figure out this move. And I'm sure he went through numerous scenarios. And so he found a guy who has the respect. He found a guy who he has a relationship with. They were teammates on the 7 Seconds or Less Suns. And he found a guy who, is going to sort of make a splash, which is important in New York. And they care in Brooklyn about connecting with the community. And Steve Nash has lived at times in his life in Brooklyn. The thing is that you're rolling the dice with a guy who's never been a head coach before. There is a long history of these types of hires, from Steve Kerr to Derek Fisher to Mark Jackson, to Isaiah Thomas. Some of them have been successful. Jason Kidd, some of them have been successful and some of them have not. I have no idea how it's going to go, but I understand how they got here.
One of the first things you said there is the one I agree with the most. There's enormous pressure because if Kevin Durant is all the way back healthy, and that's a bad injury, so we can only hope that he comes all the way back to being the extraordinary player that he is, probably the second best player in the world. If he comes all the way back to that, then in my opinion, anything short of the NBA Finals is a disappointment. Look at the East right now. Look at Toronto. This is a team that lost Kawhi. They had a magnificent season, but they're on the verge of losing here, and they're certainly not outstanding. Look at Milwaukee. They're in trouble. They're clearly flawed around the MVP and Giannis. Boston is good. Miami is... Who is it that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving won't be expected to beat next year? So to me, Wendy, if those guys are healthy, the bar is set at NBA Finals for the Nets, and that is a very tough expectation.
And I think that they should go for that because you don't know how long these guys are going to be healthy for. They are healthy now. They're going to be healthy coming into next season. So one of the things that is believed out there is that the Nets may be in the market to make a big trade this summer. Some teams, because of the financial challenges of next season, are not going to have a lot of flexibility. Well, Joseph Tsai, the owner of the Nets, is one of the richest men in the world. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, he liquidated $3 billion in stock. People were so curious as to why he did it. They thought he might be trying to buy the New York Mets. But this is a guy who does not have financial...